Yes, my name is Julie Boll. I own Julie Boll Consulting. I've been doing this for about 4 years, and I started out as consulting specifically around grants, evolved to strategic planning because of the kinds of questions that I was getting over and over with nonprofits that didn't quite know what they were doing, didn't always have the research to back up what they were doing. And then eventually fell into this opportunity to do leadership work under Brene Brown, Dr. Brene Brown. And that has been a real pivot in my business. And that's predominantly what I do now is work with education leaders, nonprofit leaders, and integrating the Dare to Lead work in their workplaces. So I think in this day and age, we're probably finding people that train as grant writers and start and go in the field that way. 20 years ago, no one really entered the field that way. So I entered as a marketing professional. My first job, I knew I always wanted to work with nonprofits. My first job was at a public library. And my first grant was getting this stuffed large, what am I trying to say, costume animal, Leo the library lion. So we got a grant to get a character and promote the library that way. And I really kind of figured out you can create change with money. Money can create opportunity that we didn't have. We weren't going to pull this out of our line item budget. It wasn't going to replace buying books or doing some of the programming that we do. However, the impact was so strong of having this grant. So I started writing grants more regularly for the library. We brought in the big read. We did some really big things that, again, our normal budget would not have supported. And these things really got us attention and changed the direction of the library, which was really exciting. So it went from being a marketing and grant specialist, if you will, to strictly grants at a university here in our hometown. It's a liberal arts university, and they were wanting to get more grants. They'd really fallen off the bandwagon. They weren't really maintaining much. And so slowly but surely, we built up the portfolio for QU. And when I left, we had secured a $2.2 million U.S. Department of Education grant and nearly $1 million in National Science Foundation funding. Really, really big deal for them. So really looking back at it, being, having this career of 20 years, I didn't realize how much capacity building I was doing in all of my positions. And that's what I did for 7, 8 years is we couldn't even write to NSF because we had all of these outstanding reports. There was just so much cleanup to do. Then we really had to coach our faculty on being, principal investigators and what that looks like. And so really much of my work early on at the university was capacity building. I knew at the end of my time at the university that grants again were a beautiful vehicle for creating change. I decided I wanted to be self-employed. I wanted the flexibility. I wanted to use this skill set to help other nonprofits who perhaps didn't actually have enough reserve to hire someone full-time. And that was my ideal market. And I did do that for a couple of years, really about 3 years, until I fell into this opportunity to facilitate Dr. Brene Brown's work. And her work is all around courageous leadership and having tough conversations. And so being a nonprofit for 20 years, I really saw a need for this work, a need for us to really have real conversations and address issues. When you think about the dynamic between having board members that are typically folks that have influence and money, and then the people that we serve, when there's a decision made at the board level that doesn't serve, there's all sorts of scenarios that happen where we have to have these really hard conversations. And it takes courage. And so that's really what my whole space is now, is coaching the people that are leading these organizations in more courageous leadership, in staying in hard conversations, all of that. I think when you have to build a grant practice from the ground up, you learn a lot. You learn a lot about what works, what doesn't work, how to get people on board. So that experience, that capacity building did really help me in building a business and starting off with nonprofits that I had to coach through what grant development even looks like. So that skill set for sure. What's really interesting to me now, though, is I do a lot of coaching, and the first thing we do is we say, 3 years from now, what has to change? And that's exactly what we do in grants. We say, okay, where are we trying to go? And how are we going to get there? And what critical way can we invest a funder's money to get us there? So we're not talking about money anymore in my coaching, but we are still solving problems. We are still saying, where do we want to be? What are our critical strategies? And then I love grant professionals. I'll hire them all day long because they're always going to have evidence. They're always going to understand how we're going to evaluate our outcomes. We're not going to put these like vague goals out there that we won't know we achieved, you know? So I really feel like the training as a grant professional really gives me a huge advantage in what I do. I can assess the organizations that I work for. I know what I'm looking for. I use my research background quite a bit in working with organizations. What's our baseline? Where are we now? How do we measure that? What should we be measuring that we don't measure? All of those questions I asked him as a grant professional, but I also ask him now in thinking about improving our organizations or careers. Ah, so Dr. Brene Brown is one of the three people I would have invited to the table, living or deceased. And so I met her. And to be able to facilitate her work in the nonprofit sector is amazing. It really is. It's just a dream come true. I didn't know, and it's a dream come true again because of the way that my career grew. She was holding space for people who only worked with nonprofit. Well, of course, as a grant professional, that's all I work with. So I could show documentation that all my clientele was nonprofit, and I just strangely hit every single box I had to hit to qualify and go and train with her and meet her and just learn about how to facilitate her work. And that is the most exciting part of where I'm at now. It's just that I get to do it and then seeing what applying these principles does to people in their lives and then the organizations that they serve. It's the same kind of transformation principle we look for. We want those awesome grants that are going to change an organization. Same thing here. It's just we're applying the their lead framework to create that change. I'll tell you what I find most surprising. I'm standalone. I'm self-employed. I have to make all of the decisions really in isolation. So I don't get a whole lot of like peer feedback or, there's none of that kind of feedback anymore. But what surprises me most is I spent 20 years of my career making people and organizations look good. Grants is really about how do we pull out the best in the organization we're serving while also illustrating the need. It's such a delicate balance that you have to walk. So being the person who does that and then shifting to being the front of the room and facilitating and teaching is so surprising to me because I would not have thought those two skill sets matched. And I think this Dare to Lead work allows for it. We don't have to be rock star presenters. We just have to walk the walk and know the work and know the people and passionately care about their ability to do the work. So I think just the fact that I'm in front of the room leading and teaching is most of my time. 4 years ago, all of my time was research and writing. So really, really different today. I do want to touch on, I have been attending the GPA conference for about 10 years now, and it is the only thing that I haven't missed ever because of the ability to meet people who are doing the same kind of work, trying to figure out the same problems and learn from folks that have figured out some of those problems, you know? So it's really been a wonderful thing. And I continue to go to GPA workshops because there's enough for me still to get, even though grants are not my day-to-day work anymore. Right now, the kind of training I'm pursuing is really around coaching. It's the certification to meet the whatever the credential is for coaching, you know. It's the opposite of the GPC, just in the coaching world. So that I'll qualify where I need to qualify to work with certain organizations. So that's what I'm doing now. And then of course I train in Dare to Lead continuously. The curriculum changes, and I feel like every time I run the workshop, I'm learning something. Someone's teaching me something, or I'm looking at a principle and understanding it in a different way. So I feel like I'm constantly in professional development also. First and foremost, experiment. Obviously, what I just described was 20 years of starting in marketing, wanting to support nonprofits and draw attention to them, evolving into grants, and then crazy evolving into being a facilitator. So experiment, you know, wherever you start your career. Your passion's not necessarily going to change, but the vehicle in which you apply it might. So that's a big, big piece. See what you're good at, and don't be too tied to whatever your degree is or whatever your, you know, 20 years of grant writing and this beautiful track record that I love to show off, and that means nothing in my facilitation work. So don't get pigeonholed by whatever you're trained to do or whatever you have this beautiful track record in, because it matters more that you're passionate about what you're doing than qualified in the weirdest sense of the word. I think that's it. Just be willing to experiment. Be willing to let your career take its natural course.